I always took the most joy out of seeing the biggest growth. And usually that came from the players that didn't start the season very good, and making sure it's all, again, so much up to the coach, right? Are you including them just as you do everyone? Are you cheering them on and expecting everyone else to? Are you setting those examples? Are you, when the leading scorer misses a practice, are they still starting or getting in right away? It's like, it's valuing and having the same rules for everyone, and everyone has something.
You are listening to the Bridging Impact Podcast, transforming leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that is passing wisdom to the next generation of athletes, coaches, and parents to transform leaders on and off the court. And I'm excited to have our guest of the day, the founder of I Love to Watch You Play, Asia Mape. She is a 4-time Emmy Award-winning journalist and sports television producer. She has worked for all the major sports networks, including Fox Sports, ESPN, TNT, NFL Network, and NBC Sports. She's covered some of the most high-profile sporting events in the world, including 5 Olympics, multiple NBA playoffs, and 2 Super Bowls. She's also interviewed hundreds of athletes and has helped tell their stories of incredible talent, work ethic, and their journeys to become world-class competitors. So welcome to the show, Asia. I'm excited to have our conversation.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
All right. So before we dive in, the first question we always talk about and ask about, and you've covered so many competitive athletes, and I'm excited to get into the youth sports world. But before we touch on the youth sports world, what kind of impact did sports have on your life growing up?
I mean, sports had a huge impact. I grew up playing sports. I mean, you can see in every home video, I'm dribbling a basketball through the frame. You can hear the basketball. I kind of had a rough start. My mom was on welfare and we lived in Detroit, and kind of rough. I just sort of grew up on the streets playing basketball, following my brothers around. And for me, it was a great confidence builder. The more I played, the better I got. And it opened a lot of doors too. I ended up, as my mom she went to college and got her degree and got a great job. So she has a great trajectory of a success story. And as, we moved and kind of grew, I kept playing basketball, and it was always near and dear to my heart. And I'll tell you, I won a state championship in Virginia. I went and played basketball in college on a scholarship. All my bridesmaids were pretty much my teammates. It's been a part of every aspect of my life, and continues to be. As you mentioned, I worked in sports television for many years, and now I run a youth sports website, and my 3 daughters have all played sports. So it's really been a powerful force in my life.
Absolutely. I feel like you're really embodying, a lot of the values that youth sports teaches us, right? And talking about connection is a big thing that I'm a big believer in when it comes to youth sports, because, there was about a couple months ago, I got together with my friends that were my teammates, my former teammates, when we were over Christmas break, and, we were able to see each other. And it's been almost 7 years since we all played together, but we try and make that a consistent part of our, holiday tradition is getting together and having that connection and having them be your bridesmaids. It's probably great to watch everyone kind of grow.
It really is.
So, with that, right, we want to make sure that as many of our young people have the opportunity to play sports for as long as possible for the numerous benefits. And, with your work in professional sports, what made you want to pivot and shift to focusing on building a youth sports website?
Well, I think it's like anything. When you have your own kids, right, all of a sudden different things are interesting to you. So I've always loved sports, as I said, and they were such a huge part of my life. And it really kind of came about through an on-air person, a friend of mine, Alex Flanagan. She was working at the NFL Network, and she had kids my same age. And we were both just starting into youth sports with them, our oldest. And she reached out and she was like, wow, this sports youth sports stuff is kind of crazy. I said, I know. I was getting really sucked into it myself. And she said, we should start some content around it. And it really sort of started as a passion project. We both had full-time jobs at that point, and we just started sort of putting some thoughts down, some of our experiences. And, because we both had worked in sports, we had a lot of contacts and experts and authors and psychologists and trainers and coaches and players. And so we just thought we had something to share with people. And it really started out more just for fun. She's now moved on and does some amazing different kind of work, but she was the one that really reached out to me and sort of got me involved in it. So it really wasn't top of mind, but I'll tell you, I was getting really wrapped up in the youth sports world. And so it definitely gave me sort of like I was ready to jump at it because I was in it, and I was certainly feeling all of the things that parents today feel as well.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it's obviously it comes along from some of those connections, and with that you kind of talked about the getting wrapped up in the youth sports world and the youth sports craziness, and some of the people listening are probably kind of have an understanding, but can you break down some of kind of the stories that really helped you kind of reflect on, wow, this is different from what I remember youth sports being?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, my own personal experience was night and day. As I mentioned, my mom was a single mom, started out on welfare, put herself through college, and worked full time my whole life. So, I mean, she would come to home games, and that was it. I mean, I can't even imagine parents today. She never saw one college game. She was busy. She had her life, and I felt completely supported by her. She was my biggest fan, and there was no pressure. There was no, guidance in any way. In fact, I can remember coming back. We were like playing in a playoff game, speaking of, and I had a terrible game, just a terrible game. And we were riding back, and she was like, "But that pass you made in the second quarter, that was so good." That was how she parented. And actually it made me mad. And I was sort of like, she was overly positive, I felt, and didn't have any skin in the game of how I played or cared if I played in college or didn't play in college, just supportive and love. And that's all I ever really felt from her.
Interesting. So, like the supportive and love, and maybe it drove you a little bit crazy at the time, because I know as an athlete or really anyone, right? Like you're such a perfectionist, right? Especially if you have a bad game. It's like, I don't care if if I'm in baseball and I got a hit, right? I struck out at a time I shouldn't have, right? And so, it's such an interesting point. And can you kind of talk about how that's kind of shifted a little bit now to, athletes are starting to feel a lot of pressure, probably, starting at as young as 6.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And look, I think I tell that story because I think it really shaped me in some ways that aren't necessarily great ways, right? So I never had that dad working with me on my game. My brother tried a little bit. I never had any guidance from my mom. And so in my mind, and also I had worked in sports television, I was like, wow, I can help my kids so much. Like there's so much more that I could have learned, that I could have been better. Who knows, like where I could have gone with it or whatever. And I sort of had this really sort of opposite viewpoint because of that. And I think it wasn't very healthy in the beginning. As I said, the website we created to be helpful. We certainly had no intentions of doing anything but sort of help guide parents. But I had to go through a really big, steep learning curve. And thank goodness for the website and all the sort of amazing people like yourself and others that I've interviewed and talked to, because I needed help. And I figured that out through my oldest and some of the hard times that we went through. And I write about that a lot and talk about that a lot. But I think I was misguided. I thought, and also, you bring yourself to everything you do, including sports parenting. And I was a perfectionist, and I do love to learn, and I want to be the best I can at everything I do. I was one of those moms. I read every parenting book. I read How You Train Your Dog. I just want to know information, And so I would take my girls out to shoot baskets for fun, and I couldn't do it. Like nothing was fun. It was like, oh, no. Okay, hold on. Get your, your hand is going into the cookie jar. Like I just was trying to impart information on them. And I think that back to your question, is one of the sort of most short-sighted and biggest issues with sports parenting is that it should be all about fun and joy and loving the game when they're younger. When we're talking about your age kids that you coach, or even my kids that are older now that changes, right? And at a certain age, if they really are interested and really want to pursue it, there has to be a lot more going on. But from a young age, when I walk around my park and I see a dad out there putting their kid through paces with the soccer ball, I'm just like, I know there's probably a 99% chance that kid is never going to play past age 13 because they're going to hate it. And also their skills aren't going to be, they're not learning. They're learning this rigid way of playing the game with the rote over and over doing the same exercise. They're not learning the joy and the fun and the love and the free play and the creativity.
Right. Yeah, it's so stringent. It's like you're getting put in a box at 7 years old instead of learning how to kind of play and have that pickup and fun.
Exactly.
And that's where, honestly, like I just read, there's this book in the back, it's called Deep Skill. And so it kind of goes into like small sided games, and like, instead of like the consistent block training that we can, think about, right, to develop creative athletes, they have to play multiple sports. They have to play soccer and basketball. It actually ends up helping them, or baseball, or football or volleyball, because it's just like you have to learn how to move. And if you specialize in a sport at such a young age, it can become challenging. And so what have you seen with the early sports specialization and how it's affected the burnout rate by age 13?
Yeah, well, I want to say one thing about the deep skill, and I love it, like people and coaches and administrators giving thought to like how to evoke that creativity and how to get that going. But if there's coaches and people standing over you still while you're doing these creative games, it's not is not the point, right? You have to be able to do those things and try and error with nobody who cares around, no parents, no coaches, and it's harder these days, right? Because there's not just pickup games at the park. But I do think that's so important, and just something I wanted to point out that is also, it's not about doing it just with your coach, it's about doing it when you have no fear of messing up. And so to your question, wait, what was your question? I'm sorry, I forgot it already.
No worries, because I'm actually going to go right there. So for me as a coach, I think one of the things that I recognize, and you're kind of touching on it right now, is one of the things I noticed with my athletes this past, season is I feel like they're almost overcoached. So I have to learn to find that art of coaching, of like letting them kind of mess up, right? And letting them kind of figure it out. And then also at the same time, I do have to come in and adjust some things. So I'm still trying to learn that kind of on the fly. And I feel like sometimes it depends on the age, the stage, right? Have you learned kind of some of the art on that, or do you have kind of some thoughts on how coaches can be, provide an opportunity to space a learning environment for them for it to be safe to fail and try and be creative, and let them kind of self-learn and regulate?
Yeah, well, let me just say, I think coaching and being a great coach is one of the most important jobs there is. I mean, the famous quote, you'll affect, hundreds of thousands of athletes. It really will. It's incredibly powerful. It's also one of the most difficult jobs, I think, to get right and to be good at, because the skill set takes so many different varied skills and strengths, right? Because not only are you managing this team and this group, but you're managing the parents. You have to know your X's and O's. You have to be a psychologist. You have to be a cheerleader. You have to be. So I want to say, I write sometimes about coaches, and I'm always very careful because I think it is so incredibly difficult, and that parents and coaches really need to work together and support each other. I know there's a lot of fear on both sides right now. But that being said, a lot of the kids, to answer your question, before they even get to you, should have had a lot of this, right? If you're a middle school or a high school coach, at that point, there is a lot of correcting and making sure they're understanding things. So there's different things. There's the actual just going out there and playing that parents need to allow their kids and try to find more free time. And it doesn't have to necessarily be in your sport. It's just climbing and biking and skating and hiking, moving your bodies. That was your other question about specialization. Moving your bodies in all these different ways on all these different surfaces and trying things and hopefully playing some sports in that too. But when you're with your friends and there are no adults around. But to get to your point in coaches, I think it just has to be that, you find those, obviously a lot of just game time, but not, I think it's more in how you respond and react, right? So like when there is a mistake or when there is a problem, let the kids try to solve it. Did you see anything? What do you think? What are you learning? Like their minds should not, the more you're yelling at them and telling them what to do, they're using that lower part of their brain. They're not learning, they're not growing, they're getting creative. So it's creating an atmosphere and an environment where they're not afraid to fail or mess up, right? That there's not a punishment, there's not a scream, there's not a this. There's like talking about it and growing and developing, but it's really a trust, I think, that a coach builds with his players and his parents, actually, about what will happen when there are mistakes. I mean, I have teams and friends I've been around, and they're young kids. Like, you make a mistake and you're pulled out of the game. I mean, how do you think the long term of that is going to go, right? They're going to play afraid and they're going to play nervous and they lose their confidence. And it's not that obviously if someone is having a terrible game, you don't sometimes have to make a change, right? But what do you say when they come out? Do you just let them sit there and think about it? Is there a conversation if you can't have it in the game, after the game, where you dive into it and talk? I mean, it's all about building that trust, I think, with the coach and the adults, if it's your parents too doing it.
I feel like that's such a good point. It's just allowing them to make mistakes, right? And I feel like this comes up consistently because of social media. I feel like they feel an extra added layer of pressure because they only see makes, right? They only see, the highlights. They see the dunks, right? They don't see that a great 3-point shooter misses 6 out of 10 shots, right?
Right.
And so they feel it, right? They miss their first 2 and it's like, oh no, I'm going to miss 6 more. When it's like, well, in reality, if you're a really good 3-point shooter, you'd probably go 4 for 8, right? Which means you're still going to miss 4 more, right, in the next eight shots, which is it can be a really challenging thing. And I think for coaches one of the things I try to reiterate, because that's one of the challenges we had this past season, is I think we had a couple of just conversations with the entire group, and they were just very nervous to make mistakes. I had the freshmen, right? So not only do they want to impress coach, they want to impress varsity coach who they want to play for in a couple of years, and they want to impress the JV players and the varsity players that are watching them, right? And so helping them understand that mistakes are a part of the game. And I'm actually reading The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle right now. And, he talks a lot about talent hotbeds and a lot of, skill is developed through failure, through struggle, through challenge. And I think just kind of reiterating that as a point for athletes to be comfortable with that.
Yeah. And it's not just, to your point, it's all those things you mentioned, all those different coaches, all the people watching, and it's also a lot with the parents. I think they're getting in the car and, I don't know how many times I've heard either from my own or other, it's like a kid could have come to the, coach and said, I don't feel well. And so you take them out and then the parents screaming, why weren't you playing? It's like everyone has to be on the same page, and parents are giving it and, being, putting that pressure on the kids just as much or more as they're putting on themselves or the coaches are. So it's really it really has to be a sort of group effort. And I think communication is really the key between all 3 parties, the parents, the coach, and the kid. If you really want to have a program that nurtures and develops, all these great qualities and characteristics you can get from sports, I think all 3 of us have to really be on the same page and communicate. And a lot of that, unfortunately, has to come from the coach, which is just yet another sort of, task to add. You cannot coach in a vacuum and expect that you're going to have a good culture. You just can't. Even if you're doing all the right things, saying all the right things, you don't know how the kid is processing that and coming home and delivering that message, and then what the parent is saying back. I mean, we're all really part of the same team. And I write about this quite often, is how we're reflecting back what happens at that practice that day or that game is so critical. If the parent is saying, I use this example, like 3 kids get in the car, you're driving carpool, and they're like, oh, I can't believe they brought so-and-so up to JV, and he's not even this, and he's not even that, and he made us run because he didn't know. If the parent says, yeah, that's crazy, now you guys are going to get less playing time. I mean, that's one way that sort of sets all them up with like, okay, you're a victim. Yes, you should be mad, whatever. But the parent has the power to say, well, yeah, we're going to need extra bodies when the playoffs come, or, give the kid a break. He's just learning the system, like when you were brought up. There's a way that parents have to work together, because if you're doing everything great, right, but the parent is on the other side just giving negative, toxic information back to the kid, you're only going to get so far. And so it's really about all 3 of us being on the same page with the right intentions and the right goals, which isn't usually winning as number one.
Yeah, 1,000%. Especially for youth sports, it's about development, right? It's about long-term development. It's about, for me, obviously we have bridging impact, about passing impact, but beyond the game is the club, our training program. And so, right, we want to basically maximize the potential of our athletes that we get to work with on and off the court, right? Because at the end of the day, right, me and you are both beyond sports, and LeBron's going to be beyond sports, even though he has, LeBron, Michael Jordan, whoever you want to say, right, they have a life beyond sports. And obviously when you get to make a lot of money, probably your choices and what you learned, are a little bit different. However, that's not the same for most of us. And, as someone that is starting to build, this is my first year doing a club program, and I've kind of dabbled in the little club space last year with a little 10U team that I was a part of, is I see kind of what you're talking about. And it was hard, right? Like I had, parents yelling at my little like 8 and 9-year-olds, and I didn't really know what to do about it. But for me now is building my own program, and I want to communicate. I want the parents to be a part of it, and for all of us to be on the same page. What do you think are some good advice and steps for me and my organization to make sure, that we are all on the same page in developing our athletes for the long term?
Yeah, well, I think, you hold a lot of power, as I said, and it has to come from you. And it's that kind of what I've been saying, constant communication. I think when expectations are clear and they're followed through on, that I think that can go a really long way, starting with the very first team meeting. And it's not like, here is a list of everything, sign it and turn it in, right? Because even in the work I do, many of those I've just signed and turned in. I don't read those, like no one reads those. It has to be something that you really believe in. You've really thought about what you want your program to be about. I think I highly recommend JP Nerbin's work. He's, are you familiar with him?
Yeah, he's 2 podcasts before you.
Oh, that's so funny. I didn't see that. I
haven't dropped it yet. That's why.
Okay.
It's coming out in 2 days from what we're recording. That's awesome.
He was amazing, right?
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, and I really have just learned a ton from, I've interviewed him a few times, read his books, obviously. But, it really is sort of setting up, what is your culture? What are you doing? And then following through on that. And parents have to be part of your team. They cannot be ignored. They cannot be pushed aside as just something you try to, ignore as much as you can. And I know that we can be hard, and I know that there are a lot of parents that are misguided. I think they have, for the most part, good intentions, but the less communication that we get, the more trouble you're going to have. And so, like, being very clear on what playing time looks like, what your rules look like, what you expect from the parents, and then that continued communication with us is really important. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in the, and I get it, because kids in high school age do need to communicate a lot themselves with the coach, because they need to start learning those skills. But too many times I've seen where the information didn't get passed through, and then you have one bitter parent who starts telling other parents stuff. Like, I think a lot can be solved if there is communication. And again, it takes time on your part. It's a call, it's an email, it's team emails, it's individual calls, whatever it takes to sort of make sure that not just the parents, but even more importantly, the kids. I've also witnessed on my own daughter's teams, a girl goes from having a lot of playing time to barely any. And it seems to me that the kid doesn't know why and the parent doesn't know why. And I'll bet you the coach said in passing one time when they pulled him back, you need to get up your fitness or whatever if you want more something. But it's not taking that sort of official time and space and really talking about it, emailing about it or whatever, because that whole person, and then you've seen this, confidence just goes down the tubes. With like a little more additional communication and not just something you've said kind of at practice as they're running out or something, it's so important. That could have saved, so much extra time, hassle, and honestly, that child's own confidence, which is huge. So I just think that communication piece is really where it's at.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I think also it's about like clear communication, right? I think you emphasized that. And one of the things that I tried to do this past season, right? Like I had 17 players, so I had a lot of players, right? And only 5 players play at a time, right? So one of the things that, we kind of talked about over and over and over again, they knew what my values were. You have to value the basketball. If you turn the basketball over a lot, you probably won't play unless you play very good defense, right? You have to rebound if you're big. So I was just trying to be as clear as possible. And a lot of times, like I'd see some frustration, and also I put a premium on body language, right? If you're gonna, be on the bench and you want to come in the game, you have to continue to encourage your teammates, right? So actually, I had 16 out of 17 buy into that the whole year. So I would say in general, that's not too bad for freshman boys. But I think one of the things that I had, kind of success with was just trying to make it as clear as possible. Now, is there probably conversations going on behind my back about playtime? Absolutely. I have no doubt in my mind about that, but I think that's just part of, kind of life as a coach and life in sports. I'm actually kind of fortunate, at the time I didn't think I was fortunate, but I was been cut, I've been a bench warmer. So like, I know what it's like and I'm able to kind of relate with them on that experience. But I do think that crystal clear communication is so important.
Agree. 100% agree. Yeah. And you kind of touched on this too. It's like, just because you've communicated something doesn't mean it was actually felt understood and processed by the other person. So that crystal clear is like the key. And also some of the stuff you mentioned, maybe subjective, maybe not subjective if you're going off stats of rebounds or whatever. But there's also just know that parents have, goggles with their kids' own play. So when you're saying that, I can hear like the parents I'm around and myself even, well, she has been rebounding. She's probably got to, some things are stat driven and like you can actually have proof, but if there's any subjectivity, you can bet that we're going to land on the side of my kid is perfect and probably is really off base in how we view a lot of that.
Right. Yeah. And that's the one thing. And, I think it's different for me as a coach because I don't have any kids. So sometimes like I'm always trying to listen and sympathize, but at the same time, I have 17 players and all 17 want to get 32 minutes in a game, so it's hard. And I think I went to a USA basketball coaches clinic and I forget the guy's name. He's associate head coach at Virginia Tech. But he says every year at the start of the season, they break down. They all have them. They think about how many shots they're going to all take, and they think about how many minutes they're all going to play. And he's like, adds it all up, and it's like 500% more like shots or minutes per game and shots per game that are possible. And it's like you have to have those realistic conversations because not everyone's going to take 12 shots per game.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned is like you can't just have that conversation at the beginning of the year. Like you said, it's something you have to reiterate over and over and over again.
And it will save you. It's hard because you're busy, right? And you're dealing with so many things. But I think in the long run, it's just going to create that culture that you want, and B, it's going to save you a lot of headaches and hassles. So it's definitely worth the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that we want to, as coaches, build a program that players want to be a part of and feel like they belong. I feel like at the end of the day, right, how can we make sure that every single person on our team, right, feels like they belong? And so how have you seen coaches successfully do that with players who may not potentially get the most amount of play time?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I know myself when I've coached just rec, I think it's giving a voice and, valuing the opinion of everybody. And, I feel like it's a hard thing to do. And I've seen way too often the obvious coaches who are just favoring those that are most skilled. And, it's so short-sighted too, because all the research now and everything, it's so obvious that where you start at is not where you finish at. And, to think that a young kid who's, 10 years old and is leading the team and scoring is going to be, the next big thing when he gets out of high school or college. It's insane, right? A lot of times it's the kids that haven't developed. They're all developing at different rates. And, it's so short-sighted to operate that way. And really, you're only, that saying, I love it, you're only as good as your weakest player. And that's how all players should think. I always took the most joy out of seeing the biggest growth. And usually that came from the players that didn't start the season very good. And making sure it's all, again, so much up to the coach, right? Are you including them just as you do everyone? Are you cheering them on and expecting everyone else to? Are you setting those examples? Are you, when the leading scorer misses a practice, are they still starting or getting in right away? It's valuing and having the same rules for everyone. And everyone has something to add, right? Whether it's, being really loud on the bench and supportive, or, just noticing that they've, I have 3 girls. I've only coached girls. What the coach thinks about them, and if the coach values them, is everything. And I know boys are probably a little different, but I bet there's a lot of similarities. And so if there's a kid that, isn't getting as much playing time at certain ages, they should be getting equal playing time, no matter how good they are. But let's just say a coach notices that their left-handed layup is getting a little bit better and points that out, or notices their hustle. And, that goes so far. That kid may not even care if they get into the game, that their coach is noticing that they're working. I'm reading a book right now. I can't think of what it is, but it had sort of this light bulb moment. It was talking about how PE coaches, there used to be that physical fitness test. And so you had to get certain things to be deemed that you were physically fit. Well, they started giving all their athletes heart monitors. And instead of having to reach a certain amount of times around the track or this or that, they were looking at how hard were you working, right? So everyone is different. We all have different skills, different speeds that we can, my fastest is not going to be your fastest. Right. But really it's about, are we both giving above 80% of our effort, or 90, you know what I mean? And so just kind of remembering that, especially when they're little, that the expectations need to be different. And, and you hear this a lot, that coaches are sometimes harder on the star players, right? Because they have higher expectations. But it's the same thing. It's if there's a player that's new to the sport, I always wanted them to leave. My biggest goal was to sign up again. That was my goal. It was rec basketball. And if I did that, then I felt success. And you do that by, like I said, seeing that everyone has value and really sort of giving them love and encouragement and positive feedback for what they're bringing to your team.
Right, it's coaching everyone to the same standards and noticing, right? Especially like if they're not getting in the game as much,
Noticing.
like then practice is like the best time to be like, I see you, baby. That's a great
Yes.
finish, great screen, and just to make sure that they're getting that same positive reinforcement. And I also think it's they're getting the same correction, like right, like in a game, right?
Yep.
If it's a blowout and they're in a game, are you still coaching? Are you on the bench
Right.
just talking with the players that started at the beginning of the game? I think that's something that at the beginning of the year, I think one game I went a little bit quiet, like I'm pretty active coach. And then, I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to, kind of coach all the way through all 32 minutes. Doesn't matter who's in the game. And so, that's how they're going to develop and get better. And so I really like your point also about, praising effort. So I'm sure have you read Mindset by Carol Dweck?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've read a lot of the work. Yeah. I don't think I've
Yeah.
read the whole
Yeah.
book, but yeah,
Of
so
course.
important.
So important. So it talks about praising effort versus being like, oh, you're so naturally talented, you're so
Hmm.
good, right? Which then makes them want to just go through easy. It's not a challenge. Easy tasks, easy games, so that they can still be
Yeah.
naturally the
The
best
best.
instead of praising that effort, right? That's what really takes players to the next level.
100%. Yeah, I really felt that with my oldest daughter. She was a very naturally gifted athlete, and I don't remember like how we would refer to her. We weren't super. I've never been like an overpraiser much, but somehow she definitely, whether it was feedback from me and her father, or if it was from the rest of the world, just always telling her how good she was, it became a real detriment because you could see her just not wanting to push out of that sort of comfort level. Or if she was given the opportunity, oh, do you want to play with your age? She played water polo, the 14s today, or do you want to play up? Oh, 14s. Like, she just wanted to dominate everybody. She didn't want to put that her reputation as being this great player on the line. And it's funny, once I kind of sort of really realized that it's not an easy thing to change. So that is something you kind of need to start with when they're young. And I wish I'd read Carol's work before she got older, but I've seen it play out. It is real.
I know, and I just had a conversation about a couple weeks ago with a parent about that. That they used to be, well, they still are one of the more talented players, right? But once you get into high school, the skill gap, starts to close, and I think they're starting to feel right, like they're not the clear number ones anymore, and so they're having anxiety about it. So I had, kind of a conversation about, kind of it's going to be consistent, right? Consistent conversation and communication with this athlete over probably a year or two, being like, we have to get comfortable with failure and struggle, and like, slowly kind of nudging them out of their comfort zone and breaking that shell, right? Not giving up, right? But just know that it might be an uphill battle, because to change that mental shift that's in there, that they, have this self-belief that they're the best and they don't have to work for it.
Yep. And the other side of that too is just understanding for parents and coaches that like the development of an athlete isn't like this straight line. It's like all crazy. And so for parents particularly and coaches, not to freak out when, I mean, kids' bodies are changing and they're going through puberty and they're growing, and all these things affect them, and whatever's going on at home. And I like to tell the story of my middle daughter who she plays soccer at Ohio State right now. And she started club soccer late. And, there was a period where she was being asked and invited to these local national team trainings when she was younger. And you're like, oh gosh, all right. She's like 11 or 12 or whatever. And then, she goes through puberty and COVID, and she was out of shape. Then she wasn't even starting on her club team for like a year, not barely getting any playing time. Then she kind of was up. She was doing really well in high school, and she had a coach in high school who really believed in her, and that goes so far in girls. And then we're like, okay, this is going great. Then injuries, and now she's not playing very much after that. I mean, it is just this up and down. And I think, parents and coaches like stepping back, especially parents, from that like in the moment stress of oh God, we're never going to make it because we're having a down year or two or week, it can even be, and I think just being there to support your kid through that and not piling on with that is like key if you really want them to get what they should be getting out of sports and to play as long as they want and love. it's really our job to kind of support them through it all and not be the extra sort of pressure and pile on.
I love that perspective, and I think that leads me to a great last question for our podcast. And with I love watching you play, what would your vision be for the future of youth sports? If parents continue to educate themselves and start to adopt this philosophy of I love to watch you play in our youth sports world.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many amazing organizations, and I'm sure you've probably interviewed people from some of them that are really working on the infrastructure of how youth sports are. And I don't mean to sound negative or pessimistic about this, but I don't see a big change coming just yet. I mean, as we know, money kind of drives everything. And youth sports are a huge business. And I see every day that these big companies are getting into the youth sports, and it's all about money, right? It's all about the bottom line. And so I have worked or spent most of my work through the parents, because really we have the most power and the most control over the health and the success and joy that our kids are going to get from sports. And I think, although I love that there's a lot of work being done on how to structure clubs and how to do things, and there's a ton of research on how to do that right, I like to focus with the parents. And for the parents, it's really about taking agency, making your own decisions, and not getting caught up in the fear of missing out, and not getting lost from what the true sort of selfness of your child is, right? Like, every kid is different, and there's nothing wrong with a kid who wants to play professionally or play in college. Like, it doesn't have to be that sports are just for fun for everybody, and that there's no goal beyond that. There are goals beyond that. Sports are great for a lot of kids beyond that. But there's also, 7% play in college, 2% play Division I. So the majority of them are just going to play until high school, if that, because so many quit by age 13. We know those stats are like 70%. So making sure that they're getting what they should be getting through sports, and not burning their bodies out through early specialization and too many practices and too many club teams and too many games, and keeping, even equally important, their mental health, because kids today are pressured. They are so full of anxiety and stress and depression, and sometimes even suicide. It's awful. And a lot of that is coming from the parents and coming from this sort of return on investment. And again, I get that, and I totally understand parents and where it comes from. And as I said, I think they have the best intention. They just get lost. There's a lot of information out there. Like, for example, everyone should be a multi-sport athlete, right? How many times have we heard that? So a parent is like, okay, well, how are we going to do that? Well, I guess we're going to play hockey at the same time we play basketball, and no, that's not what it is. That's being a multi-simultaneous athlete, and that's doing even more damage. So it's like really being thoughtful, about where your goal is, what your kid wants to do, working back from that goal, and then working in with the system. And, sometimes if the kid is tired and needs a break, they need a break. And you need to pull them out for a season, a week, a day, and having the sort of confidence and the agency to do that. So how do you get that? How does that happen? It comes from communicating with your kid and not creating a world where I did with my oldest, where she was afraid to tell us because our lives were so wrapped up in sports that she was fearful of that. And not fearful, we weren't going to hate her or be mad at her, but she just didn't want to let you down. And that's how I think a lot of kids are. They don't want to, they see how invested, how much money, how much time they've spent and the parents have spent. And then, I was on the board and I was making my game day muffins and I was doing and the friends were my friends that were on the team. And so I think it's really hard for kids to have that space and that trust that the adults in their lives are going to really listen to them. And so you have to create that. You have to listen. And there's this very tough balance of how much do you push when they need it, and how much do you pull back? And every kid is different, every family is different, every situation is different. But if it's an ongoing thing and you notice certain signs of unhappiness, and it's not like, I'm not saying, okay, quit in the middle of the season, but like you might need to pull back, give them time off. And it all really comes from that trust and communication, open communication with your kid. And I'll just end it with, like, my daughter wanted to play in 8th grade in the Olympics. She was on the Olympic development team for water polo. She chose her high school for her water polo coach. By the time she was a sophomore, she really didn't want to play water polo, and she was very much interested in art. And that happens, and that's okay. And I think that's what is hard for us parents. It was hard for me, which is a kid that says they want to do something or love something in 8th grade can change their minds and will change their minds. And you have to be open to that. It's not about sports. It's about your kid and keeping them happy and healthy and, supporting and guiding, yes. And when they need little nudges, yes. But also, most importantly, making sure they never, ever, ever think that sports are more important than them and what they want to do in their happiness.
I love and I appreciate your honesty, and that's a great way to finish off the podcast, is just that consistent communication with your athlete. And I think that comes from a coach too, right? From my own perspective, I think it's our responsibility as coaches to know our athletes' goals, right? And, do they want to just play because they want to have fun with their friends? Is that your program? Should you maybe steer them to a different program? Or do they want to play Division I collegiately and they want to be pushed a little more? And I think it all sounds like it stems from communication and active listening and really asking those questions and giving agency to our athletes and to the parents as well to say, no, hey, Coach Justin, your club program, it's just not going to fit for us. And I'm like, that's okay. Right. I want you all to find something that works for you. And, you're not necessarily missing out, right? If there's a better opportunity for your athlete, or maybe they need to take a season off, that's totally fine.
I've seen so many kids take time off and come back stronger and more engaged and happier. It happens all the time. It's a lot. These kids are doing a lot with school and sports and life, social media and everything. It's just, it's too much. And so, like, listening, as you're saying, and knowing and building that trust so that they can trust to tell you that when they need a break is super important.
Yeah, that's huge. So where can people, find your website, find the social media, and connect with you if they want to, learn more, have a conversation?
Yeah, I would love that. I love when people reach out. My website is ilovetowatchyouplay.com, all written out. And I'm all over social media. Facebook is at I Love to Watch You Play. And Instagram is at I Love to Watch You Play. Some woman has I Love to Watch You Play, and she will not respond to any of my direct messages. If you're listening, I'm always like, she has that, and she just won't budge. So it's at I Love to Watch You Play. I'm getting ready to start up a podcast, so hopefully I'll have you on my podcast one of these days. But those are pretty. Oh, I have a newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter. You get like the three main points delivered right to your inbox: articles, blogs, things that make you laugh, things that inspire you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Asia. I really appreciate the wisdom that I got to learn, and that I can, continue to pass that on to the parents I get to work with.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
For listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.